So I want to obviously talk about something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm going to talk about Habitat for Humanity. I'm going to talk about it specifically, and I don't often get the opportunity to talk about how it intersects with my faith journey, and then talk about sort of charity in the larger sense in terms of poverty alleviation. I have a deep love and respect for Habitat for Humanity and the model of the organization, and it was my church that got me involved with Habitat. What they did was they were very committed to short-term missions, and I was about I guess 20, 21 at the time. And they sent me out, and I had the privilege of building homes in Hungary, Poland, and Uganda. And in Uganda, I really had my life changed. It was absolutely wonderful to be able to build some homes there. And I got on fire for Habitat for Humanity. I just thought it was wonderful. And I came back to the church, and I thanked them for the experience. And I said, you know, we don't need to go to Eastern Europe. We don't need to go to Africa to be able to see poverty. It's in our own backyard. What about if we as a church, what about if we as a congregation got together and got involved with this wonderful worldwide mission that's building one home every 10 minutes somewhere in the world? And so I went to a board to ask for money for a Habitat for Humanity home. And something that we have in the Baptist tradition rather than the Catholic one is something known as church politics. So this will be foreign to you, but I will tell you about it from the Baptist context. And so I went into the Board of Missions and I asked for $100,000. And that was the laughter is what I got in response. They just giggled. They were a bunch of old men who giggled. And I said, could I have $100,000, please? If we do this, we could build a Habitat for Humanity home here in the city of Toronto. It's desperately needed. And, you know, as a congregation, we could be the hands and feet of Christ outside of the four walls of this congregation. And the laughter ensued. And what I was told was, son, and you know that something bad is happening when it starts off with son. They said, son, we love you, we love your enthusiasm, but $100,000 is a lot of money for the church. But you can raise the money from people in the congregation, but you're not allowed to ask anybody to make a donation. Now, you don't need to be a professional fundraiser to know that that's a very difficult way to raise money for a charitable cause if you're not allowed to ask anybody for money. And so what I decided to do was build awareness of the organization. And to do that, I found out about church politics. I wanted to put a display in our lobby. Now, we as Baptists, I think the more committees a church has, the more Christian it is. And we actually have a lobby committee that reports to the property committee, that reports to the board of finance, that reports to the board of deacons, as all good churches should. And I after 6 months and submitting architectural drawings and a business case for why I wanted a display in our lobby, I was given permission to do that. Our lobby committee doesn't advocate on the rights of the poor. Our lobby committee is really, this is a true story. It's in charge of the lobby. And so I eventually got permission from Almighty to be able to put this 4-foot by 6-foot home in the lobby. And so I built a little structure, and as we raised $100,000, I put vinyl siding on the house. I thought it was kind of a neat little thermometer, raise awareness of the organization, and by the time that house was finished in our lobby, a home would be finished on Luttrell Avenue in the east end of the city. So I set about and I built this thing, and I got a call a week later saying, son, we love you, but your display is hideous. It's horrible. It's plywood. It doesn't, you know, it's offensive to God Himself. And so we would love it if you could actually move that down into the basement. But don't worry, lots of people walk through the basement. And so I argued, and finally I was given this bizarro Canadian compromise. And it was this. I was told that I could put an easel directing people to the real display, which was down in the basement. And I just thought that was just crazy. And so I did that. I put an easel there. But for those of you who know construction, I used 3 sheets of plywood. So it was 12 feet tall and it was 8 feet wide. It was the largest. They didn't say I couldn't make the easel. And it was the largest and ugliest easel known to man, directing people to the display, which was down in the basement. So I put that there. I got a call the day that it went up there from a deacon saying, "Son, we love you a lot less now. If you get rid of your easel, you can bring your display back upstairs." So, there was a whole lot of work and just to get to the point of doing good. And that to me is actually, one of the greatest frustrations I have when it comes to, faith-based and specifically Christian charities, is that often we put the obstacles of doing good in the way ourselves, and we limit our thought and our scope internally, rather than having external forces say we can't go out and do that. And I found that a great frustration. In 1976, there's a wonderful story of a man named Millard and Linda, and a couple named Millard and Linda Fuller. They are the founders of Habitat for Humanity, and they have just an incredible life journey. And a brief synopsis of it is this. Before the age of 30, Millard had amassed an incredible fortune. He was a multimillionaire by the time he was 29, in the 60s, when being a multimillionaire was not just as cool as it is right now. And he had all this incredible wealth. And while he had that incredible wealth, he lost that incredible love and relationship that he had with his wife. And Linda left him and went off to New York City to seek some counseling and to decide whether or not she would permanently leave her husband. And after a few days, Millard headed up from Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, to New York, and he caught up with Linda, and he said, let's have some counseling together. And day by day, they had this counseling and with a minister there, and it wasn't going well. And until on the taxi ride back from one of the counseling sessions, Millard turned to Linda and said, "It's the wealth, isn't it? And how about I get rid of it all? How about I sell the business? Let's sell the house. We were happiest when we were in college, when we had absolutely no money. Let's go back to those days. Let's go back to the days where we struggled paying for our rent, and we'll bring the bank account down to zero. We'll sell the estate, everything, the speedboats," and it was a real sacrifice. "And let's live, as Christ taught." And she said yes. The minister that they were counseling with thought they were nuts. He said, and Millard often said, "It says that you're supposed to do that in the Bible. Don't you believe it?" And he said, "Yeah, but you got to be practical." But Millard wasn't. He wasn't practical at all. And he went down, and there's a series of sort of discoveries that they had with their faith. But it eventually led to 12 people getting into an abandoned barn on a Christian commune in rural Georgia, where on a mudroom floor, these 12 people got together and said, before we die, let's all agree one to another, let's house 1 million people. And they came up with that audacious goal, that sort of stretch goal, that goal that certainly isn't achievable, that goal that you would think isn't achievable, but it was Millard and Linda's faith that resulted in that goal being achieved in August of 2005. They housed the 1 millionth and 1 millionth and first person to live in a Habitat for Humanity home in Knoxville, Tennessee. That happened. But I take it back to that abandoned barn, and understanding, what compelled a couple who had just given up everything, who had no money in a bank account, having to live on this commune, to say that it is possible to be able to house 1 million people. Think about our own context here in Toronto, to house 1 million people. How difficult it is. I have a great love for the women of Sisters of St. Joseph, and in particular those who are part of a group called WRP. If you haven't heard of WRP, it's the Women's Religious Project, and in about 1990, maybe it was 1980, they started to set about on this Millennium Project where they would house a neighborhood. They didn't specify a number, but they wanted to go and they wanted to build a neighborhood in the east end of the city. And so they set about and they raised the money. That actually was the easy part. They raised $2 million fairly quickly. And then they started to work with government, and they started to work with neighbors, and they started to work with Habitat for Humanity, and they started to work with the Daniels Corporation, and everybody started to get in there. And it really is only in faith that something good happened out of it. It was only because of perseverance that something good happened out of it. And so when I ask that question, is God still relevant? Of course God's still relevant in alleviating poverty, because you need that faith and that determination and that drive. And that is, really, it comes from a spiritual connection. It comes from a Christian connection. It comes from an unbridled belief and hope that you can make things right. The Sisters of St. Joseph didn't believe for an instant that the difficult circumstances that the families in the city of Toronto were living in, they didn't feel that they were living in, or thinking that they were living in situations of despair alone. They were doing that because they knew that each of those families were equal. They were equal in God's eyes, and therefore we needed to do something about it and to bring everything up on terms of a platform that made sense. Craig Kilberger, how many of you know Craig Kilberger? I feel very old, so I assume all of you know him. I think he's like 16 now. He's graduated from university. He has the Order of Canada, Nobel, and he might follow Benedict, but he's a pretty awesome guy, and he won an award recently, as you can imagine, and at that address I heard him speak, and he told a captivating and a powerful story. And he said this. He said, a few years ago, I decided that I would stop listening to the bad news. I'd stop listening to all of the difficult news that we read, whether it's about tsunamis, man-made disasters. The newspaper and the radio are filled with bad news day in and day out. I'm going to turn those off, and instead I am going to just make good news. I'm going to stop focusing on the negative, and I'm just going to work on the positive. And as he told this story, he goes on, and this part's like a quote. He says, so I made that decision, and I decided to phone up Bishop Tutu to tell him about it. And I love how he just says that. He just, Bishop Tutu on speed dial. And so he phones up Bishop Tutu, and he says, I've decided to make this change in my life and my perspective, and I'm gonna just focus on the good. And Bishop Tutu said something to him that I thought was very simple and very profound. He said, college boy, I don't know what they teach you in Canada, but the newspaper is God's to-do list delivered to your front door every single day. You need to pick up that paper and you need to do something about it. And he's right. We do need to do something about it, and we can all do something about it. And that really is the central heart of what I want to say, is that we all have a role to play. We all have the capacity to give back. Martin Luther King Jr. has that wonderful quote that we can all be great because we can all serve. We all have the capacity to serve. Sometimes we just need that fuel and that drive and that audacious goal like the women did have of WRP, or like Millard and Linda Fuller had down in that abandoned barn. We need to have those audacious goals that allow us to do it and transform from good humanitarian efforts into efforts that are Christ-like. I'm a volunteer, and I imagine many of you are, with Out of the Cold. It's a great program with the city of Toronto, and it's needed. And the government, in a social welfare state, can provide all of those beds if they have the leadership and desire to do it. But what they can't provide is the women and men who will kneel down beside that mat and that cot and treat the guests that evening with dignity and respect. And that is why we need Christian mission, and that is why we need to remove any obstacle that there is in our way to be able to go forth and proclaim the word. And And we do that because we're commanded to do it in the Great Commandment, but we do that also because it's simply the right thing to do. I heard a wonderful speech recently. I'm kind of hooked on TED Talks. I don't know if any of you are. There's a few nodding heads. They're pretty awesome. Brian Stevenson was speaking. He's a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer in the United States, and he was talking about why he does what he does. And he summed it up perfectly, and he summed, I think, why we do charitable work the way we do. He said that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, but justice. The opposite of poverty is not wealth, but justice. And when you think about that and you start to make the connection between social work that we do, charitable work that we do, not as the alleviation alone of poverty, but rather the installation of justice, it reframes your discussion, I think. And I'd like you to. I'm going to leave you with that one quote, I think, unless there's one other item. There is one more point that I'm going to make. Baptists always have 3 points, so this is my third one. Simply this: that we need courage to be able to do it. And another TED Talk, and Brené Brown spoke of this. She talked about courage and being vulnerable. One of the things that I think is important, and the reason why there are so many Christian organizations that are doing great work, is because they can remove that sense of vulnerability that we all have and make connections happen and make people feel and know that they are needed and part of the work. Millard and Linda, when they were in that abandoned barn, did not think to themselves, we are going to house 1 million people. What they did was they were able to make connections for everyone to realize that they were a perfect part of the charitable activities that needed to happen, to raise the number of homes that needed to be raised, to be able to go on and to build in a model that was sustainable. They are the ones making those connections. When you start to remove that vulnerability because you feel connected, you start to feel that there is that you are worth something, that you are worthy. And when you are worthy and have that self-confidence of worthy, vulnerability goes away, and you can focus on others as well. So I'll leave you with that, and to have wonderful courage to go out, especially during Lent, and share the good news through great, wonderful actions.